Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and I have my fellow PPC candidate here, Mr. Jason Lavigne. Welcome, Jason.
Hello, thanks for having me today.
No worries, Jason. Thanks for making the time. Jason, you've been on before, and usually I do a format where I ask a question and the guest kind of takes it away. But today it's going to be more of like a back and forth strategy session.
Excellent, thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to that format because I'm usually the host, so I'm really happy to be hosted. Thanks for having me.
It's something interesting, isn't it? Like I'd say about out of every 100 interviews I do, maybe I get invited on like 2 or 3, and it's really rewarding when somebody else actually listens to what you have to say.
It is kind of neat how it evolves from a host to being on shows. When you start with just a few guests, you make your way through a whole bunch of other guests, and eventually you're making statements like, after every 100 guests I interview. It's quite the evolution, and I've watched you do that, and very, very impressed with what you've been doing, Payman. And I really enjoyed having you on our show like over a year ago when you were posting on X and getting out there and getting the messages about the bills that we were following. Might have been 11 or 18. I'm not sure which bill anymore now because there's so many of them. But I would really appreciate you starting that. And it's great to see you do your podcast and do so well, by the way.
Oh, well, thank you. I think we're up to like 5 views per episodes. We're improving.
Well, we'll see what we can do today because we're all about marketing and getting the messages out there. And that's kind of where we're going to be touching today. Now that I've announced my PPC candidacy, I'm now seeing the PPC world from that perspective, and I've been in it for about a month now. So I definitely have some more experience.
I was going to ask you about that. Now that you've made the switch, not that you've changed your values or anything, but you were running as an independent. Now you're running as the PPC, which is kind of the same thing. But have you noticed, like, what has changed? Have you come under more assault, less assault? Have people abandoned you for abandoning your values or anything like that?
All the above, but they're not abandoning me over my values. They're abandoning me over what they perceive to be the values or policies of the PPC. And what I found is most of the time they're incorrect. They haven't actually taken a look at it and reviewed it. There's this assumption that once you join a party, you're now under control of something like a whip or the leader and things like that. But that wasn't the party I joined. The PPC actually is a very independent party. It allows people, actually requires, because it's a very young party growing, that its candidates are actually independent minded, very strong on their own 2 feet, and are able to do things on their own. And that's basically the format of the PPC party. And that really resonates well with me because that's who I am. I'm a very independent person who stands on my own 2 feet. And I didn't need anybody to be my leader or look over my shoulder. And that's where Max was really great when we had a conversation about this, because he made it very clear to me that, yeah, he's the leader of the party. He helped create it and help lay down the framework, but he's more of a partner or a resource to the candidates as needed than he is an overseer or controller of the party. So under that model, under that framework, I actually can prosper now that I have a team around me. A lot of people have supported me online. And yes, there definitely have been some people who've been disappointed that I've left my independent run, but I am still independent within a party. So when I speak to them, they understand it more, and they know that my values didn't change. I didn't abandon anything in the process. I really gained a team, and I think there's been a big value in that. But I've also been, even more intensely targeted by, I would say, mostly conservatives, because they definitely think that in some way we're going to harm the conservative movement. Unfortunately, that's how they feel. But once we talk, they understand that we can sharpen the conservative movement and lean back towards the right, which is, I think, the way a lot of everybody in the conservative movement feels. A little bit too far left is not comfortable. We're not familiar with that, and we're not happy with that. So I think a PPC does complement CPC quite well if we're looking for a return to the right and conservative accountability. So once we talk and are able to connect on that, I think people understand my values have stayed the same, but I'm certainly part of a team now that's looking to move Canada back to the right. And so, Prairie is I'm a huge fan of Prairie, so it's great to see Prairie here.
Yeah, I can't believe she actually watches all my episodes. I almost
Mhm.
feel bad. I'm like, this girl, she feels, she's got a sense of responsibility to watch the most boring podcast on the internet. So thanks, Prairie.
Well, been a long fan of mine as well from the early days. So Prairie is somebody I hope I can meet in person one day.
So we're gonna make our way, and at the end of this episode, I want to get to this. You and I talked about something called Operation Cactus and Warren Kinsella and whatever happened in 2019. I wanted to share my um, sort of my observation of what's going on with all these assaults on the PPC. Have been a candidate for like a year now.
Mhm.
I'm pretty much like semi-retired. I'm my business. I put it aside so that I can run, and all I ever do is look at the assaults on the PPC right now.
Okay.
The first like targeted assault was that Florida incident. Like Maxime Bernier has a home in Florida. Do you remember that?
Sure, but we should correct record. His wife inherited and purchased that property.
Right. That's correct. But what I mean, that Kian Bexley broke that story. And I think what they were hoping was that it would completely destroy the PPC. But Kian Bexley, and I'm going to say this on the record, he's not a very bright guy. And I don't think he knows how to, like, there's a certain way that you have to take somebody down. And he didn't do it surgically. So a lot of people criticized him for saying that women can't own, he said it's wrong for a woman to buy a house, like a wife.
Really?
Um,
Oh, it's
so
unfortunate.
he got pushback for that, and then he said that it's a tropical island oasis. And then you go to Google Maps and you look at it; it's inland, and it's
Mhm.
actually a dump. Like I don't know why Max bought it.
If anything, it's a statement about not thinking that we're going to lose the coastal waters and Florida is going to be underwater. They're actually investing down there. They don't think this global thing, the crisis is real. I think that's if they were on the top of a mountain and really worried about the sea levels, maybe I'd have a concern, but I don't.
Yeah, that's true. He's staying true to his values. So that was the first attempt. That started a
Mhm.
couple months ago, and then I think it died down 3 months ago. And then I noticed that the targets against the PPC shifted to the PPC is a racist party. It's a white supremacist party.
Yeah,
And
they're trying to connect it to that narrative. Yes.
so they tried that, and it didn't really work for whatever reason. But specifically with me, it doesn't work is because I noticed they were tiptoeing around the issue that I'm not white. So they tried that and it didn't work. And now I'm noticing what they're doing is they switched over to saying it's the diversity party. So now they're attacking a couple of like there's me, there's a Chinese lady, there's a black guy, and there's a couple more.
Okay.
And so like, have you noticed this? Like these targeted attacks?
Yeah, and they actually date back even further than that. As an independent journalist, I watched Andrew Lawton take a few swings at Max while he was running in Manitoba during that by-election, trying to implicate him in the WEF, as if the WEF is somehow connected to Max in some way, shape, or form. The irony, though, is Pierre, has a history. He's cleaned it up. He's removed himself from the website and other things like that. And Andrew was gracious enough to share some pictures he took while in Davos with us. So I think, just the association of being in Davos isn't enough for me to be really concerned about globalists, because I am tremendously concerned about globalists. It's really what I've been working on for a couple of years now. But I've seen these kind of attacks even as an independent candidate and an independent journalist. And I always found it odd because when you're looking for truth, well, let's just be honest. There's a lot of people who are connected to WEF in weird ways that are uncomfortable. And if we're going to pick on, let's say, Max, because he was in Davos in 2008, I think it was, something like that, well under Harper, well, then let's be fair, because that means we have to go after everybody, like Michelle out of Calgary, who's a CPC MP right now, who's a proud young global leader. These are, uncomfortable connections, I think, for everybody in Canada to be seen. So if we're really going to do that and we want to flush out WEF, let's just be fair and just flush it out everywhere and not just say, hey, because Max was there in 2008, this means the entire populist movement with the PPC should stop. I think that's some pretty ridiculous arguments. But we've been seeing, yes, you're right. There's a repeated, like a churn in the machine of attacking Max on various issues. He hasn't won a seat. He can't win an election. These are tropes that have really developed over the years that are not just unfair, but they're not even logical. Because are you really expecting every MP to win every election? And you're also forgetting that Max was a successful MP for quite some time, made his way up the ranks in the CPC. So if it's really a voting record, which establishes whether or not you are a successful MP, Max has already done that. And I also think for him to try and do it with a new party is knowledgeably one of the most difficult things to do, and he's still doing it. We are making very good inroads when it comes to good candidates and good places to actually have them elected. And in 6 short years, I'm impressed. As an independent candidate for 2 years, I know how much work it went into just me, let alone a whole party with an HQ and trying to get 338 candidates in 2021. Like, that's a very impressive accomplishment for somebody who could have had the leadership of CPC if he just, played ball, did what they said, that kind of thing. But his principles didn't allow that. So I stand behind Max, and there's going to be more tax payment. They really don't like the fact that Max is the leader. And there's a current one that says if Max wasn't the leader, the party would have a lot more support. And that's another divide and conquer type of messaging aimed at the PPC, because it's meant to make us divide so that we actually lose support for Max. And it's a very odd thing to see, because I don't think PPC actually has an issue with the current leader, and there's strong support, including from me. So until that changes, I don't even see that as an actual issue, but you see that everywhere right now. I've been dealing with it for 48 hours with the CPCs.
Who's attacking you? What I was trying to get at is it's a very coordinated attack. Like, it happens in 1 month cycles. It's usually the same actors. I go through their X profiles, and there's not really much activity. And I'm wondering if this is all coming out of, like, are they sending out a wire and they're saying, all right, guys, today we're going to attack the PPC like this?
There's a couple, I think, efforts possibly. There is what you would consider the trolls, and there may be something coordinated with trolls, because that's basically what they do. And then I think there's another group, which are genuine people who actually have concerns because they do hear the media, and other times they hear Max, or they're conservatives and they watch that whole debacle itself. And they're genuine when it comes to what they're expressing. And usually, because I've removed all my blocks, I actually see all of this stuff now. Usually I can see the difference between the two. One's just no goodwill, and they're just trolling you, trying to get you upset, provoke you, or something like that. And then there's another group that genuinely actually wants to have conversation. And sometimes they're not even used to getting replies. So when you reply to some of them, you actually get to talk. And over the last 48 hours, I've had a lot, and there's about a half dozen people that were absolutely not for PPC. At least that was their messaging. And after some conversation, they're like, well, if CPC drops the ball after this next election, maybe PPC should pick it up. So keeping that conversation open, I think, is very valuable, because we shouldn't lump everybody on the internet under one group of trolls. There are genuine trolls, and probably troll farms even. No proof of that, but it certainly feels that way a lot of the time. But there are some real genuine people that have questions, concerns, and once you inform them, they actually melt those concerns away, and it does help. They may not jump on PPC's bandwagon or anything like that, but they're keeping an open mind for the next time. If CPC doesn't do what is needed in the next election, if they win it, there's going to be a tremendous appeal to the PPC, and people are seeing that even today.
By the way, I totally, going back to what you said earlier about the WEF, I didn't consider that. That's another, what do you call it, vector of attack.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of criticism of the PPC in the comments, and I don't want to sound like we're being fanboys. So let's go to
address
this
some
one.
of them.
Yeah. I really like this guy. He comes on, and I've talked to him in person, and it's quite intimidating talking to this guy. He's like operates at a higher level of intelligence than I do. So I think this is the whole Privy Council thing, if I can read it correctly. I'll give you my comments, and then you can address it. I myself, I'm not really a Christian, but I always think about what Jesus said about let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Like, if we try to find if you have a criticism of Max that actually sticks, like if he murdered someone or if he's a serial stalker or something, sure. But the whole Privy Council thing, if you want to go down that road, then we have to disqualify basically anyone who's ever run in politics, which might be a good thing, but we're not there yet.
I'm actually going to push back a bit, because this is, in my mind, a valid criticism. Because yes, you have to make your way up the ladder, the political ladder, in a party that we know historically has always been a little bit on the sus side. Okay, all parties, major parties are that way. For Max to make his way through that party, yes, it absolutely took. He had to get recognized. He had to be accepted, invited. This isn't a completely democratic process in the CPC party. And for him to get all the way to the point of cabinet and then trusted all the way to Privy Council does indicate that, at least for part of his career, he was saw and looked at, including his leadership race in CPC, as a potential leader for the party. That's good. And it also raises the questions when you're somebody that's concerned about globalists and you understand exactly how these parties work. However, with all of that said, Wolf, he could have taken that next step and been that leader if only he fell in line with special interest, allowed Scheer to steal the election for leader, and just waited to be the next one. That I guarantee you was presented to him, and he absolutely understood what that would mean. That would mean to violate his principles, bite his tongue, and not fight back. Because Max did not bite his tongue, he did fight back and created a party to do so. Wolf, he's got my vote, because he could have taken the easy road, had a much bigger house in Florida, maybe one in California too, and been the leader at this stage. We may not even have Pierre at this stage if Max decided to do that. So those principles, Wolf, is why I support him on this particular issue. And I would also like to remind you, he's a resource to people like me and Payman, who's a candidate now. And as we're making our way towards the House of Commons, we are going to have lots of questions about how things work. And having somebody who's been all the way to the Privy Council and one step away from the PMO itself is a valuable resource when it comes to candidates like me who are trying to make those same steps towards the House of Commons without being in a corrupted party. So whether or not he was corrupted along the way, between him and God. But what came out of it is he stood on his principles. I trust him for that. I have seen nothing that told me he is not a good guy. And his education with the WAF and globalists since this time, because frankly, they did keep things a lot of things from him too, has changed my opinion on whether or not he was one of those. I don't think he ever was a globalist. And by stepping away from the party the way he did, to me, that proved it, Wolf.
And we got another one from Wolf. Basically, it's saying that the party is too top-heavy, too Max-heavy for a populist party. Not for the other professional political parties, sure, just have one leader, run it like a dictatorship. Wolf, from my experience, this is not because headquarters is saying all you candidates sit down and shut up. They actually do come to me a lot, and they say, whenever I criticize something HQ, they're like, Payman, you're the leader in your community. Please go out and sell the party. So I see this more of a Payman Ascari problem, and we're trying to change that. Like, I have my podcast. There's, Peter Terrace and Michael Bader and Wayne Baker. They're out there pounding the pavement, and we're trying to take some of the weight off of Max's shoulders. That's my response. What do you say, Jason?
Very similar. So yeah, we concur with that. And Wolf, you're looking at two potential future candidates for leadership at some point when Max decides or the party decides that it's time to select a new one. What I do want to say here, Wolf, about this particular issue is if Max's goal was to be like a dictator and have his party all the way till the very end, he surrounded himself with the wrong people. The people he surrounded himself with are people like Payman and myself. We wouldn't put up with something like that. We are the type that will go and critique the leader and will hold leaders accountable. So if it was Max's goal to always be the leader of the PPC, and he was going to do it not on his merit, he surrounded himself with the wrong people, because we are all leader potentials as well. That's why we're running in our riding, and any one of us could become a fantastic option for the PPC leadership in the future, and Max is providing us that place to be. So I do not see a future where Max would be able to dictate the leadership in the face of opposition from the UCP members. There's just far too many strong independent leaders already around him for that to even be feasible. Now, what he has done is he's certainly shown people like Payman and me leadership that we are willing to follow at this stage. And I certainly will support Max all the way through the election, and I will follow through and be part of the leadership review that he is providing to us once the election is done, no matter what the results are. So I'll look forward to that. And Wolf, if you pay attention and watch us for a while, we would be some of the first to tell you we need a new leader. So, and Max has dozens, if not hundreds, of people like that around him right now. So don't you worry. The PPC itself, the members, the leaders, the candidates, wouldn't allow for a dictator. It's just simply not built that way.
All right, let's put the questions aside for now. We can always come back. And if anybody has any hard questions for me, you can go ahead and ask. Hopefully, I don't choke on screen on a live stream. Let's switch over to the concept of a vision. So I'm going to tell you what my vision is for Canada, and what I think the PPC's vision for Canada should be is what I mean. And then I want you to tell me what you think it should be. It's very much like sovereignty of the individual and the rule of law. So the example I give is, imagine all the people are like these little Lego blocks at the bottom. And then you put a mirror above those people, and those people reflect off that mirror, and that's how society works. And that mirror is rule of law. So you have people, they're the building blocks of society. They govern themselves, and there's no government in this picture. And all of that together is God, or God operates above that, and people have a one-to-one relationship with God. But what I'm saying is there's no government. Now government has stepped in, and they've basically said, we're above that mirror. They've shattered that mirror, and they're basically ruling over us. And I want to return to a system where people are free. And I always say you're free to, love your spouse, raise your children, manage your household however you like, run your business as you like, free from government intervention. So it's very much a classically liberal vision. That's what I think the PPC vision for Canada should be. What is the Jason Lavigne PPC vision for Canada?
I align with you very well up to the point where you say intervention. So government intervention, that is absolutely where I like to spend some of my time to see what they're doing, because that often leads to overreach. And then that becomes a very difficult way to try and stay free. But where I do believe the government needs to be there is foundational. We do need to have infrastructure and a bit of a platform for us to be free on. The real goal and purpose of government isn't really to control, it's to provide even playing fields. So really at its root, we need roads, we need security on the borders, we need those kind of things there so that we can prosper in a free market, and we're not worried about tribes coming over the border to destroy us. And, we've moved on in modern society. It's not so much physical anymore as it is informational, but there's still, risks and concerns there. And another part of what government should be there for is to help encourage and lift up. So that would be, providing sort of education along the way, or at least the infrastructure for it, not controlling the curriculum, but providing the building. Individually, we could do homeschooling like we do, but collectively, we also need people that are working and providing. So providing the foundation is where I do think the government should be, and that's where they should stay. That also means they should be very small, because I'm not asking for a lot. I'm just asking for, on a federal level, border security, and then on a regional level, in individual markets that are close to me, that provide the goods and services that I'm going to need to survive. Other than that, they really should get out of the way. So when it comes to interfering, I certainly draw the line there too, because way too often it turns into overreach and not assistance when they try to interfere.
You mentioned border security. What do you think is what is the minimum role of government? So border security, we could say military, law enforcement, military. But what else do you think is the absolute minimum that we need and the private sector can't provide?
Well, in today's modern world, border security is more than just the boots on the ground. There's an informational war that we're in. There's market wars that we're in. There's a global war that we're in. There's a globalist attempt that we have to address. All of that actually is a little bit larger of a picture now than it was even 100 years ago, when it was more or less just a physical boots on the ground border to be concerned about. I do want strong government services when it comes to intelligence and security. I do want those kind of things in place. What I don't want them to do is turn it on to us, use it on us, and treat us all like criminals or potential criminals. That's where pre-crime and thought crime and social credit and like all of that stuff really, really concerns me, because that is over leveraging of the services I think we do need in abusive ways too. But I do want to be able to compete on an international stage. I do want to be able to coordinate on global initiatives that are needed, not the fake ones that are based on actual intelligence or science, but there are some initiatives like safety and security, wars, and death. These are some things that globally we all share concerns on. So I do want to see federal government, and this is why I'm running to be in the House of Commons, because that's where basically the first step for the people to participate on that stage, the global stage, international stage, starts. So that's why I want to go there and give my input on that level, because I do believe we need those kind of things in place, those kind of infrastructures in place. On the other side, I do want to see a return to trusting your citizens. This is something that Eva Chipowicz asked of Trudeau during the POEC. At what point did you become afraid of your citizens? Because that's exactly how we're being treated. Like, we could be the potential enemy. And we're seeing this with bills and regulations that they're trying to push through, like Bill 63. You're presumed guilty like off the bat. Like, we have to address those kind of things. But that takes me back to, what's the real role of government? Is it to nanny us, or is it to provide a fair playing field for us to all work in and live in? And if they got back to basics, some of these concerns about what they're doing when it comes to overreaching and using the intelligence on us instead of where it needs to be would go away. But no, I think we do need to have a properly functioning government in the modern world. It's a lot more complicated than it used to be, but we can prosper in that environment as long as we have good government, and we actually have the people taking more active role in government itself, which is where I'd like to see Canada start heading in the future.
I just as an aside, there's a question from Gary. How was my door knocking in Cloverdale? I went door knocking with Max, I think 2 weeks ago. It was pretty good. We hit a whole bunch of houses. There was a lot of us. What really disappointed me is how disinterested most people were. Like, we did not get anybody saying we don't support the PPC. It was mostly like, I don't care. I want to go back and watch TV. There was one crazy NDP supporter that lashed out at Max, but other than that, she thought he was with the Conservative Party, and she's like, I don't support the Conservative Party. You're all evil. And he's like, yeah, but I'm with the PPC. And she's like, whatever, I'm voting NDP.
Mm-hmm.
So,
that's pretty common. Yeah. And Gary, thanks for those questions, and great job, Payman, for doing exactly that, door knocking, because the media is not helping us reach the neighbors. We don't have the traditional systems available to us. We're being suppressed. As a party, we're being suppressed. It's very clear. You're talking about the attacks on us, but we also have the issues of being ignored when we shouldn't be. But thankfully, Max is going to be on the leadership debate this time around, and they're going to have to show at least some of his ideology and his platform during that debate. But I'm not surprised, because some people were harmed, Payman. And this NDP member, she's probably suffering, and she's probably in a lot of pain. This is why she might be very scared of anything changing, because change is very uncomfortable for her, and there's been a lot of it lately. We have been seeing a lot of people come from the NDP party and the Liberal Party to PPC. People think we are trying to split up the CPC, but CPC only makes up about 15% of the party. The rest of it's coming from concerned citizens who are parents and workers who are not blind, and they've woken up, and they see harm all over the place, and they see the regular people involved, the regular parties, the same ones. They're not asleep anymore. That's where we're seeing a real rush. So I hope that NDP member, she finds some relief soon, because it sounds like she's hurt, and a lot of people are feeling that as well.
You're a far nicer man than I.
Well, I do care. I really do care. And this is why the PPC party attracts me, because they're for the people. And if we can care about people, regardless of previous voting history, we're going to be in a much better position as a country.
So, sorry, I sidetracked there. Let's go back to the question I had about minimal government. I did sort of a thought experiment, and I said, like, the one thing that you cannot outsource is the courts. Like if I punch you in the face, you can't go shop around for a sympathetic judge. So I figured you need that. The military, you can technically do it like a militia style, but it runs better when you have the government. And then you could have police officers. But most of everything else, people, even if they organize at the community level, they can provide most of pretty much everyone else. What's your view?
I think that was a simplification on your part on the system. So, for example, if you punched me in the nose, my first step wouldn't to drag you into a court or possibly a police station. My first response would be, "Why? Can we chat about that and try and explore that? Use all possible means before you take some of these more extreme measures, kind of like." Reminding everybody what Trudeau did to us with the Emergency Act. He went to the extreme end when he had lots of options available first. I promote that. So mediation, conversation, debate, even before you start taking extreme things like courts. I don't want to overwhelm courts, and I kind of want to find a way to address things more civilly. With that said, I don't disagree with your actual assessment. Not really independent, and it's getting very difficult out there. And we're seeing what we traditionally thought was a justice system expose itself as really just a legal system. There is a very big difference between the two of those, and I'd like to see it return back to a justice system. But right now, at this stage, we don't have that. We have federally appointed judges. We have narratives in the judicial system itself. Well, the legal system. See, I can't even get that word out of my mind because I want it back so badly. I want a justice system. But we have some work to do there. And I also think that when it comes to on the ground issues and ways to deal with things, I think you're going to see a bit of an evolution around that, hopefully, more back to a decentralized approach where there's a lot more community based, church based, faith based, whatever, but a lot more community based organizations coming together to help because we're going to need to do that. The reliance on the government is straining the government. And it is also one of the ways people directly can help relieve some of that strain from the government and basically create a smaller government by returning some of these to a local level. Schooling, policing, business, entrepreneurship, these are low hanging fruit that we can handle as a people that we don't really need to rely on the government for as much as we have traditionally. So I think we can start making those steps. And I think we kind of have to. The government's strained, the economy is strained, things are getting tough globally too. I think we're going to have to tighten our belts and learn how to do this sooner than later. And I kind of welcome that step. I think this would be a good cleansing for Canadians, and we might get right back to our communities and understand that the power has always been here. We just kept handing it up the chain, and we've seen what they've done with it. It's time to kind of, under almost requirement, start doing this ourselves again.
I'm going to pick up on what you said about the church. One of the things that really bothers me is the government giving so much money in charitable donations. Some of it goes to churches, but then because it goes to churches, it also goes to mosques, synagogues, temples. What's your view of this? We pay taxes and then the government transfers it to religious institutions.
It's a complicated question, and that's why I'm on your show because you ask the best complicated questions. There's a line. I think there's a line between making them dependent and providing the infrastructure or the ability to be independent. There's a line. For example, churches are under attack by a lot of people. People are burning them down. So you certainly need some sort of policing services provided to try and minimize that and hopefully eliminate it. So there's a line of where the police, or not the police, but the government should be involved when it comes to those kind of things. But I put the line at dependency versus independent. Just enough services so that you can go ahead and be independent and do what you need to do, whether it's religious services or otherwise, but not so dependent on the government where you can't do that without the government's involvement. That's kind of where the line is. So if you need financial support to stay afloat, you're now crossing the line in my mind, and you need to kind of address the why do you need financial support. Is there an issue when it comes to people being able to get to your property? Let's take a look at the roads. Is there an issue with security? People don't feel safe. Let's take a look at that. But it really shouldn't get into the business of trying to keep it open and in business. That's kind of where the line I'd like to see is, but it is a blurry line. A case by case basis, I think, should be acceptable because that's what a justice system is. It is a case by case basis assessment. But as a whole, when it comes to dependency on the government, that's where I think you should be taking another look. That's basically overreach of the people to the government when they start to depend on the government. And if you can eliminate that, then this question actually wouldn't be posed, because I think everybody would agree with that level of government involvement when it comes to even religious institutions, to provide them a place to be independent, but not dependent.
I to put Wolf's comment of unrelated but funny robbery at knife point of lawfare.
Oh, Wolf, we could have stories about lawfare, my friend. Canada's full of it over the last 2 years.
I want to switch over to another difficult topic, and I'm heading in a direction. It's going to be I'm going to tie it into my whole strategy, but racism. So one of the issues that I encounter when I say I'm running for the PPC is like a knee jerk reaction. They're like, "Oh, they're a racist party." It's very easy for me to deal with it. I just say, "Well, if they're racist, why would I be running for them? Why would they accept me?" How do you deal with it if you come across this?
Well, that argument is a race-based oversimplification. It isn't that simple. I'm not even sure what the racism would be. So on one hand, the PPC party is accused of being racist. On the other hand, they're accused of being diverse. It doesn't seem to fit. They are contradictory statements. The truth is the PPC actually reflect Canada. So if you have a problem with Canada, then you may have a problem with how the PPC party itself looks, because that's exactly the representation. It's the People's Party. You'll notice it doesn't have a race in it or even an ideology. The People's Party. So it's going to look exactly like Canada. So if your trouble with the PPC is race-based and you're oversimplifying it at that level, I think you might want to take a step back and zoom out and see if you have the same issue on the entire national level. And if your entire national level is a race-based oversimplification, let's change the system. Let's change the system. Let's get in there and get rid of those concerns for you, because I'm sure that the person would have no problem coexisting with their neighbors of any race, religion, or creed. I don't think their issue is literally that they have a concern about races. Their concern is maybe their worldview that I'm going to unfortunately try and remind them is being fed to them by this whole globalist agenda that's trying to make you upset. So I believe these people themselves are not racist. They actually would have no problem coexisting with neighbors of different races or religions. And I believe they believe that too. They just have this fear now that on a national level that we can oversimplify Canada down to a race-based narrative that's very, very harsh and disappointing to see here in Canada, because traditionally we don't have race-based issues until recently this narrative has been brought on. So when it comes to the PPC party, we represent Canada. This is what Canada looks like, and I'm in a mixed race marriage. My wife is not Western, and that doesn't seem to be a problem to many people. So I really don't think we actually have an issue with racism or even racist, but we have an issue with people being in fear that there is a growing narrative of racism, and that there's properly the fear is turning into concerns. So hopefully when I speak to people like this, I help them identify that we are not racist and they're not racist either. This race-based oversimplification is a narrative meant to separate us. And it's not going to work in Canada. It's always failed historically, and it's going to fail again. We just have to tackle it without calling each other names as we do that.
So I'll tell you my strategy. I'm looking, I talked about this in a space the other day. I look at the left, the Liberal Party, the NDP party. They have this strategy where they go find minorities and they use those minorities to get the minority vote to push their leftist agenda. And they do it in a very brazen way. Like they get that minority person to dress up in their minority clothing, they push their minority accent, and they're trying to bait the right into getting angry because they see the culture changing. So I'm like, all right, two can play that game. So I'm going to everyone in the Iranian community. I'm like, listen, guys, vote for me. I'm an Iranian. I'm educated. You knew me since I was a kid. trust me, I know what's working. So I'm hoping to do that and strip some of those minority votes away and give it to the PPC, and then turn around to the left and be like, suck it. Pardon my French.
Hmm. Well, I do take a different attitude on that, and that is there's going to be radicals and extremists on either end. And I don't think it's really fair to paint the entire left based on their radicals or the extremists that do exist within their communities. It's a fraction, 5% or less. They're very vocal and they're out there, so you see them a lot. And they're doing what you're talking about. They're trying to provoke and cause controversy and reaction. But I do want to give all sides a little bit of leeway when it comes to this, because there's extremism and radicalization happening all over the world here, not just on the left or even on the right. So what I would say to that is most people that you're talking to, which would be visible minorities, supporting left ideologies, most of them are really, really not for the radicalization or the extremist portions that they're seeing in their own parties or their own side, because they're not. There's a lot of parents out there that do not like what's going on in the schools. There's a lot of workers who do not like what's going on with their paycheck. And there's a lot of homes that do not like what's going on in the grocery store. And they are not radical and they're not extreme either, but they do have progressive and left-leaning ideology. I welcome them to the PPC party because those are exactly the type of people we attract. Now, extremists and radicals, you're not going to get rid of them, and I don't think it's something that should be attempted to get rid of. That's just the way that people express themselves, as long as they stay on the correct side of the law, which, by the way, I think we need less of, not more of. But as long as they stay on the correct side of the law and follow rule of law, this is a society that we have to learn how to coexist in. But I do think it's a small group on both sides, and I don't think that they fully represent everybody that leans in a particular direction when it comes to ideology.
So you're a more capable politician than I. Speaking of capable politicians, Robert Bard, PPC candidates,
Edmonton.
very, very, very good military record. He says, I would question, what about the PPC is racist? What have they done that is racist?
Correct. It wasn't really any Canadians done. Like, that term's being used a lot, but we haven't really seen examples of that. And then if there are some, they're very isolated and they're done by a particular person. And who knows what their motivations are. They can be really bad and they're unfortunate. But to paint the brush across Canada or a party or both based on the actions of a few is incredibly unfair. But it's the way we have to address these narratives, and it's getting ugly out there. That's part of the information civil war that we're in.
So we got another tough question from Kanako. He's been critical of PPC policy lately. I think his question is something like Alex Cargill.
I recognize this name. Yeah.
Everyone's welcome here. I think what he's asking is, should the PPC embrace? Is it in PPC's interest to embrace messages like that?
Okay, so let me read it. Oh, okay. So there's I like the open mind of Kanako, and have not to paint populism and Alex Cargill's Spurgeon. I'm not sure what he's referring to, or she's referring to. So maybe if you do, maybe you can explain to me what you get from this question.
PPC has my vote if they answer my question and have policy to not paint populism and Alex Cargill style spurg out racism nonsense. So I've had Alex Cargill on.
I know him.
I think he's very when he starts going on rants, I have to admit he is quite articulate. I think what he's asking is, does that strategy work? Should PPC paint itself in a more like professional, less emotionally charged manner?
Well, Kanako, I'll take you back to my previous answer. PPC party represents Canada. So do Canadians want to speak and be unfettered and unfiltered and have their mind and even at times be wrong with what they say? Yes. And that is what freedom of expression is. I had Bruce Pardy on a few times now. He's a lawyer out of Ontario, Queen's Law professor. He's a very intelligent gentleman. And he just spoke to the House committee about Bill 63, which is trying to eliminate free speech, really, online and on all the platforms. And Kanako, you might be somebody that might want to pay attention to this, because a lot of your openness could be perceived by some to be difficult and concerning. And I will fight for your ability to keep doing that, and so does the PPC, because as Bruce Party mentioned, the only way to protect rights like free speech is for the government to get out of the business of trying to protect rights and free speech, because it's exactly what they're not supposed to be doing. So if you're not happy with everything Alex says, or even his opinions, or even his ability to articulate or not articulate it to your satisfaction, um, I support his ability to say it. Now, Knuckle, I don't think you actually think that Alex has represented every single opinion of every single person in the PPC party, because as I explained earlier, we're all independent and we absolutely are strong fighters that stand on our 2 feet, and Alex is a great representation of that. So what I would ask you to do, the same way we do with your post on X, because you're proficient out there, is we look for the real meaning of what it is you're looking for. And what Alex is asking for is to understand that we're the People's Party. It's going to be diverse, and we're proud of that. That's what we're building on. And when you get into the race oversimplification argument, it can come across, no matter what side you're on that one, as race insensitive. I'm not saying Alex is, but I can see how people can take it that way, like your question kind of implies. So let's give Alex a little bit of leniency, and we can take a look at what his actual message is, which is the PPC party represents Canada, and I support that message. And if he articulates it well enough for some, great. And if others have issues with how he puts it, at least he can say it, and I would fight for your right to say it as well.
So these tough questions are sort of one-sided. If anybody's got any tough questions for me, I'll try my best as well. Let's switch over to difficulties. Like, what challenges are you facing in your writing? I'll start with my challenges. There's a lot of immigrants in my writing, and it's very difficult to sell them on the mass immigration issue, because they think it's a personal attack. It's something about the psyche of immigrants. That's one problem. The other problem is that there's a lot of wealth in my writing. And when there's wealth, you can shield yourself from the problems that are coming, so they don't see it as readily as the other writings. So what are your challenges?
Our number one challenge here in Alberta is Max, specifically. There's a concern because of the long history, generational, here in Alberta, of Quebec sounding and Quebec directed prime ministers and party leaders and parties, taking wealth out of Alberta, holding us back. And there's a lot of resentment and animosity when it comes to that. And I understand why it's there. It makes a lot of sense. If you look at the history of what the East has been doing to the West, you can see why. You just have to look at the equalization payments and stuff like that. Oh boy, that's a tough issue here in Alberta. So for me, in my writing, it's Max himself. There's a concern that Max is going to be in control of what happens here in Alberta, and there's a lot of concern that we're going to continue to be focused on the East, or basically Ontario, Quebec, and their needs, and not so much Alberta. And to kind of expand that a little bit more so everybody can get more of the context, in Alberta, we are very independent. Okay, we like our sovereignty, and we're going to keep fighting for it, which means we are very Alberta first motivated here. And that is something Max cannot offer, almost by definition, about being a party leader, is he cannot offer Alberta first. He can offer Canada first, and we can understand that, but he can't offer Alberta first. And that offers my constituents a bit of concern. Now, good news here, Payman. When I'm able to sit down and talk to people who ask that exact question, it does not take long for them to realize that Max is a resource to the candidates like you and I, and we are the representative. So as long as you align with my principles and the policies of the PPC party, which we all share, and when they take a look at that, it's very easy to align with that, because it's truly common sense, and it's strong principles. Then they start to realize that Max is an asset, even to Albertans, because Max can help open the door so that Alberta can get a lot more representation in the House of Commons through the party, the PPC, than we currently have. Right now, we are heavily dominated by the CPC, who let us down throughout COVID, throughout the trucker convoy. Our farmers have been let down, and there's a real resentment as well growing towards the CPC. In my riding, that resentment is at par and possibly even higher than the resentment towards Quebec and even Max. So that's opened the door for PPC in my riding, and we had a strong showing here in 2021 as well, over 10% support in that election, and it's just grown since then. The Coot situation is top of mind for a lot of people here in Alberta. Danielle Smith has kind of let us down on a few of the conservative fronts that we were really hoping she wouldn't. And there's a lot more people who are a little bit more proactive around municipal corruption in Alberta. So they're getting more involved in the PPC party as well.
Looks like you got a good handle on things over there.
Well, we're very vocal out here. Alberta is not a place where you don't know how they feel. You absolutely know how they feel. You just have to find ways to listen, understand, and then try and implement that with solutions.
We actually have a flurry of questions. Here's another easy one. Does the PPC support the King? I mean, I don't think Max has said no. I think he's useless, but we got bigger problems. What's your thoughts?
I have asked Max about this on my show. So we're a constitutional monarchy. We've been that way for quite some time. I am a constitutional Republican. I definitely think we need to head in that direction. There's a long road, and I've had this conversation with Max. Max does take the position that Canada's future should be far more independent. At some point, we should be a republic. He doesn't think, and he's not wrong, that Canada is ready for that yet. We actually have a little bit more corruption to deal with within the House of Commons, in the houses themselves, and some other issues that are far more pressing at this stage than a system change. Now, with that said, the PPC party is people. It's not the King's Party of Canada. It's the People's Party of Canada. And a true republic, which Canada doesn't have at this stage and would require lots of constitutional change to get to, doesn't allow people to get involved enough. So with a republic, a Republican-like type environment, we can get there. And the People's Party provides that right now, because it's about decentralization. It's about being able to have the people's voice, recall, and other types of options when it comes to dealing with public officials. And it's getting us towards that direction of a Republican-like government. Now, at some stage in the future, when there is enough support on the province level, because you need a unanimous support to remove the monarch, then of course, PPC would be very supportive of that, if not even credited for the beginning of that movement. Because by building up the PPC party itself, you're basically headed into a constitutional republic. You're just not there yet.
Here's a question directly for you. If Jason wins, what will he shed? Will he shed light on the Kirk Reese whistleblower story?
I have, Donald. Yeah, I have. Kirk Reese has been on my show multiple times. I've connected him to other shows, and I've assisted him in many ways which aren't public. What I would do is I'd be taking forward the concept of whistleblowers in general when it comes to going back to the House of Commons. They actually revoked and rescinded some protections, and we would need those back. So built on my information and knowledge and experiences with Kirk and others, Donald, there's many whistleblowers and some of them aren't public yet. I would be working hard to bring that whole entire portion of society back. Donald, over my shoulder is a book called Bearing Witness, and there's an entire chapter on whistleblowers and the value of whistleblowers, because we need this in society. Those are the truth tellers. So when we have a culture which says snitches get stitches and keep your mouth shut, and in fact, I've been told even recently to stop talking about Pierre's misdoings because that's something that needs to be suppressed. Like, we're getting silenced way too much here in this country. So Kirk Reese has opened my eyes on quite a few things. Not just him. I've had several whistleblowers on, and I'm also working with some whistleblowers who haven't been public yet. I take this very passionately, and it is in my book, Donald.
Here's another. Donald says, "Thank you." Here's another
You're
one.
welcome, Donald. Thank you for the question.
Who's going to deal with the corruption? Because CSIS, the RCMP are all looking the other way.
Well, let's correct the record a bit. Hategate Affair, which is a document that came out just over a year ago, was addressing this one, CSIS and RCMP intelligence surrounding Diagolon and whether or not they are an extremist group worth worrying about. If you read that report, about 50% of the intelligence officers in CSIS and RCMP were correct with the assessment, which was it's not even defined as a group. It doesn't even reach the definition of a group, and it's not a national security threat. The other half, unfortunately, they were following the single source of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, which they believed to be true. Now, I'm sure a portion of that group that believed it to be true wanted it to be true, while the rest of it just believed it was true. So that tells me that it's not fully corrupt. CSIS and RCMP are not fully corrupt. What we do need to do is remove the RCMP from provinces as policing. RCMP needs to be refocused on the federal level, and it needs to make sure things like the Prime Minister and other officials are safe and secure, and that we also have intelligence of a national importance at that level. I'm fine with that. And CSIS needs to start focusing and maintain its focus external to Canada, much like the CIA versus the FBI in the United States. The CIA is externally focused, where the FBI are internally focused. I don't mind RCMP being the internally focused one, while CSIS is the externally focused one. And this kind of takes us back a little bit further in this conversation, where I say we do need these kind of intelligence and national security organizations in place. They just need to be properly focused and oversight. This is where I think PPC really shines the light, is we need to have more oversight, civilian-based oversight, inquiries, and make sure that when we have concerns, we can initiate it. I have 2 or 3 concerns around the Coots matter, how the RCMP handled it, RCMP Alberta, RCMP headquarters. There's a lot of concerns there that I think need to be inquired and looked into, and I would be pushing for doing exactly that, being far more transparent. For example, why don't we have the names of the MPs who are suspected of foreign interference? That's an example of where this particular system needs to be addressed, and we need some reform around it. But I don't think they're all looking the other way. I also have some insiders, to bring us back to the previous question, some whistleblowers within RCMP Alberta. It's very clear there's an internal struggle. And if we look at even police services like the Ottawa Police Service, 80% of the people in there support Detective Helen Cruz, while a small fraction, 20%, don't. And what we're seeing in RCMP is about 50-50 when it comes to the ones that you do want in there, the types that you do want in there to do a good job, they want to uphold rule of law, versus the order followers or the ones that just comply. It's about 50-50. So I wouldn't say it's all of them that are looking the other way. But if we support the ones that are doing the right work, then I think we're going to see a shift in that organization. But I think one of the first steps is to remove them from provincial policing and get them refocused and have some more oversight on them.
Hi, Brian. Brian Everett's another PPC candidate. How are you doing for time? We're at the 57 minute.
Yeah, okay. We're good. We keep going.
So I want to come back to that. I have a targeted question for you for that law enforcement thing. But now that I have you here, I have a question about Diagolon. The question is, like, what the hell is it? Because I heard about it first when Tom Marazzo was testifying at the Public Order Emergency Commission, and he said it's a comic book. But then I've also heard other people say that Diagolon basically threw the Coots boys under a bus. What is it? Are they nobody, or are they actually a legitimate organization?
Well, Diagolon, they're not a legitimate okay. There's phases. Just like everything else, there's an evolution. What started off as just Jeremy McKenzie ranting and raving and getting out his expressions, which, by the way, if you actually listen to the context of them, they're very good and pointed. And some of them make a lot of sense. In fact, he helped shift that Overton window strongly to the right on a lot of matters. And over time, you certainly see other organizations, even the Liberal Party, paying attention to that. Sorry, Donald, there you go. You got your PPC hat. But there's also been an evolution. So what started off as a podcast and then a couple jokes over time has turned into a lot more support and a lot more aligning when it comes to a lot of Canadians across the country to a lot of the messaging. What is Diagolon? Well, if you listen to the RCMP and the CSIS messages and emails and correspondence that came out of the Freedom of Information request that led to the Hategate affair document, they're nothing. They've never been convicted of a crime. They've never harmed a person. They posed for some pictures that scare some people, and they certainly got brought up in the House of Commons a lot when it came to the invocation of the Emergencies Act and some of the justification around it, all the way to Jeremy McKenzie actually appearing in the Public Order Emergency Commission from a Saskatchewan jail because they had him in jail at the time. It is important to note that since all that time, every charge that Jeremy has been under, and I believe there's 23 of them, none of them have led to a conviction. So even though there was concerns to go ahead and convict him, they didn't lead to one. And in Canada, you actually have a 60% chance of being convicted. So getting 0 convictions on 23 charges is not normal, and maybe it points to more of a misinformation concern when it comes to the Crown's perspective of what Jeremy is, because it sounds and looks like they were overcharging him and they were overzealous when it came to the persecution and prosecution of him, because it led to 0 prosecutions. And that is a very, very abnormal ratio when it comes to our legal systems, about 60% success on prosecutions. So that stands out to me that maybe people don't fully understand it. And as your question implied, there's certainly groups that fully do not understand it and make claims like Jeremy in some way, or even Diagnon, threw anybody under the bus. I went through the entire trial. Diagnon did not come up in the trial. There was no narrative in the court about Diagnon being involved in any way, shape, or form. There was no defendants from Diagnon. There was no association to Diagnon during the trial for any of the Coutts-related trials, and that would include Chris Carbett, Tony Olenek, when Chris Lysyk and Jerry Morin were part of that trial at that stage as well, and any other of the Coutts trial. So even though there's a narrative that anybody did anything, it's unfair. Now, I can specifically address these concerns around what Jeremy said early in the Coutts situation, and that was that these gentlemen were stupid to bring guns to Coutts, and they're responsible for providing a justification, which was a picture of firearms, to the House of Commons, which really rolled and extended the justification of the Emergencies Act in the eyes of the government. Now, the POEC addressed this issue, and at that time, they basically gave the government the justification and said that there is valid concern that Diagnon, or a group like Diagnon, like Farfada was another one that was brought up during the Public Order Emergency Commission, was capable of creating a militia-like organization that would challenge the government in a violent way. Now, since then, with the passage of time and the luxury of trials, that never panned out. There was no other charges. There was no other militia identified, not even in the trial of the Coutts side of things. So even though Jeremy came out early and said, look, they shouldn't have brought guns, turns out in the end, the jury agrees with Jeremy. So Jeremy was one of the first outspoken people at the very beginning that ended up saying the exact same thing that the jury said. They shouldn't have had guns there. But they didn't try and kill police officers. And that is a consistent message that even Jeremy has been saying. Now, Jeremy is also responsible for trying to assist the men in very direct ways. Chris Lysyk was using a legal aid lawyer all the way through December 2023 when he reached out to Jeremy because he was very depressed with the actions of his current lawyer, who was quite literally sitting there looking on his email, and he didn't object or didn't represent. From that, there was a campaign to raise funds, and it was successful. Over $200,000 was raised to acquire a new lawyer for Chris Lysyk, his name was Daniel Song. And Daniel Song, within 6 weeks from being retained, had Chris Lysyk released out of remand and free and clear of any additional criminal charges. All he did admit to during his plea agreement was having his restricted firearm not stored properly in a location in his property. That's the only charge that Chris Lysak ended up with. So he was freed. And Chris Lysak has said from day one, if you will listen to his interview with the RCMP, he apologized for bringing his restricted firearm that needed to be at home. So he did understand and accept at the very beginning that that was an error in judgment. But he certainly wasn't guilty of the other charges. Jerry Morin was also released on the same day. He had a plea agreement as well that was accepted by the Crown's office. And I believe none of those agreements would have been on the table if Daniel Song wasn't retained as a lawyer to assist these men. So do the people that say Diagnon or Jeremy specifically harmed these men? They're not looking at the full picture or the facts or the evidence in the trial. They're just repeating the narrative. And it's unfortunate to see that narrative propagate even to this day, because the jury didn't convict Diagnon. The judge didn't convict Diagnon, and Jeremy hasn't been convicted in any of the criminal matters that have been brought before the courts. So I really hope that we can start to demystify what Diagnon truly is at this stage, and understand on an empathetical level that they're not criminals. Now, that could change. Like any organization, I could go to my church and one of them could punch somebody and suddenly that person's a criminal. And that would be very unfortunate and very sad to see that. But to this day, I think they've been persecuted as an organization and very unfairly, because some of the things that you brought forward is common tropes that are used about Diagnon, and they continue even though they haven't been justified, and there's no merit behind them, at least in my views. Now, I've seen lots of communications. I've interviewed all these people. I've spoken to Jeremy specifically about these issues live on my show, because I like to go to the source to find the information. But that's my assessment at this stage. And I don't see that changing unless there's some dramatic changes to Diagnon or some of the information that I've collected. If there's new information, I'd be open to seeing it.
I made the critical mistake of asking Jason Lavigne a question about Coots. That was a lot of information. My question, Jason, was actually really much more basic than that. What is Diagnon? Is it a podcast? Is it a comic book? Is it a movement like Black Lives Matter? Is it an organization like Action for Canada?
That's a loaded question. First, there's no comic book that I'm aware of. There's a podcast called The Rage Cast, but I think he's changed that now to Jeremy McKenzie. So I think he's changed the name of that. I'm not quite sure. I don't consume or watch a lot of Jeremy's stuff. Not really my flavor of tea. I prefer a different type of medium, but a lot of people do. What are they? Well, if you want to listen to what the RCMP or CISA says, is they're an unorganized, loosely coupled together community around an entertainment show. And this is what the RCMP and CISAs have classified it. It hasn't reached the level, according to them, of an organized group or even advocates or in any way, shape, or form. So when you ask about Black Lives Matter, that doesn't appear to be what Diagnon is. Could it turn into that? Well, like any other community that's grown rapidly over a short period of time, there certainly can become some organizational elements to it. And of course, like every other group, there's going to be niches and certain subgroups and stuff like that. Could it turn into something that is more than just comedy? Absolutely, it could. And that should be something that's watched, because how you get to the point where you end up having a group more like Black Lives Matters that are taking to the streets and doing public messaging and trying to influence public policy, well, we need those. We have to have those. But where the limit is when it gets to radicalization or extremism or violence. If it starts to cross those lines, no matter what side, left, right, center, whatever, that's where, as a society, we say, well, that's too far. Currently, Diagnon hasn't reached that level, but they are certainly a group that, if it was not well dealt with, could cross those lines, not as a mission like they're trying to, but just as a result of statistically large numbers. Eventually, somebody might punch somebody. And then, of course, what you'll see very quickly is an entire narrative that, of course, are violent, because here you are with a bloody nose. So at this stage, if your question is, what is my assessment of Diagnon? Are they a group to be concerned about? No. I don't think they're a group to be concerned about because they're not even a group. Could it turn into something that's a little bit more that we need to pay attention to, at least be aware of and not ignore? Yeah. And could it go too far? Well, we see this historically all over the place. Groups with intentions that are to push the public class or the political class of that particular group could turn into things that are uncomfortable. Also, at the same time, Heyman, those are also how change happens, and that is how people get together and get aware of things is by loudly speaking about concerns, and they are doing that.
All right, no, that clears it up. I'm going to go back to the law enforcement question. We were talking about law enforcement originally. Gilbert, I've asked you many times to come on the show and tell us more about Operation Cactus, but so Warren Kinsella, he's the original gentleman that did the attack on the PPC in 2019. Maybe here's a question that you could answer before we get to law enforcement. Why isn't there more support for freedom fighters who are being prosecuted by the politicized court system, like Coots? I've found that since the mandates ended, everyone has gone back to sleep.
Because they're more practical, because right now PPC is not in a position to form government. And right now the hyper focus, especially from a group that was abused by this current government, far more than many other Canadians. If you consider yourself fringe or freedom or along those lines, you absolutely were abused, all the way to bank accounts and troubles with your finances. So I'm not surprised that they are traumatized and still are. And they're being very realistic when it comes to who's going to bring the change today. Well, it's supposed to be the official opposition of the government who's supposed to fight on that level. And we are seeing a big shift over to the Conservative Party. That's very clear and a good sign, at least if you do not like the far right radical left of the Liberal Party and NDP coalition. So they want to make sure that there's a change. A very dramatic change. Yes, CPC was not behind them during the convoy. Yes, CPC didn't stand strong for them. And yes, CPC is not even doing it now. Like, you're not hearing out of Pierre the things that Trump did. Like, Trump said, I'm going to pardon Jan 6 on my first day. But you don't hear Pierre saying, I'm going to pardon Tamara Leach and Chris Barber on day one. Like, we're not getting the same level of support when it came to the populist movement that was fighting from the Conservative Party. Okay, and I get it. And even then, this group seems to be okay with that as long as they can get Trudeau out. And I think what you're seeing here, Payment, is a symptom of the I hate Trudeau movement more than you've seen the I love Pierre movement. We saw this with Trump as well. People disliked Biden so much that they were just going to vote for Trump. And what you're seeing here is a lot of support for Pierre, even if in their hearts they don't actually have that support for Pierre, because Pierre didn't have that support for them. But they would take that over the abuser that they've been dealing with for the years now. Now, here's the good news, Payment. This is really setting Pierre up to either put up or shut up. So if he does win and there is a super majority and PPC is capable of getting some of those seats, but it's a strong majority for the CPC, if they don't succeed, this will be the first group that jumps into their trucks or their tractors to say something about it, because they're going to put the support behind him strongly, and he better show up. I can tell you, just from watching the history of the CPC, Pierre specifically, and how he handled certain issues, this group's likely going to be disappointed. At least the abuse from Trudeau will stop, but the accountability isn't going to be there that they're hoping for with Pierre. And if that does happen, and it's just a prediction, this is where PPC is going to pick up a tremendous amount of support. There's going to be an incredible convoy over to the PPC to get around people like Randy Hilliard and Max, who was arrested during some of the COVID lockdown stuff, because they have always maintained the support for this group and anybody that's looking for a return to reason, which this group is. So they may not be supporting PPC yet, but I do think that if CPC or Pierre does drop the ball and that honeymoon period is very short, that you're going to see a tremendous amount of support for PPC out of this. Now, I'd like to support Pierre and his endeavor to correct Canada. So I want to be part of that rudder that helps keep him moving to the right, move that Overton window back to the right. And if he doesn't, this is why you want some PPCs in there, because we're going to let you know. We're going to be that canary in that coal mine. There's going to be no way that Pierre will be able to quietly let you down and disappoint you. We will let you know. So if anything, let's put a couple PPC MPs in there so we can keep an eye on this attempt to fix Canada. Because if it's not going well, we want to make sure you're aware of that.
I'll quickly give my thoughts. Canada is not America. Like, Americans have more of that spirit of liberty. Americans have more free market enterprise, and you see it in their media, whereas we have state-sponsored media. So we've been under relentless attack from the CBC. It didn't help that the conservatives, the right, they just, they surrendered their support for Pierre. So he doesn't really need to prove to them that he supports the freedom fighters. He's already got their vote. Also, people they're not aware of, what Michael Jackson's been going through right now, what Kirk Reese is going through, the Coots boys. I'm sure if I talk to 100 people in my neighborhood, 99 of them have no idea who they are. That's my thoughts.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add to that?
Well, no, you're not wrong, but there's a lot of trauma and abuse. And this is what Theo Fleury talks a lot about, is there's a lot of adult-based trauma and abuse here going on. And a lot of us were still abused. In those mindsets, you're less likely to take large risks. You kind of want to take calculated steps towards being unabused or the abuse stopping. And Pierre, for a lot of people, is that next step. And if that provides them comfort and they do end up getting what they're looking for, I'm really happy about that, because this abuse has to stop and healing has to start. But I do raise that concern about this whole new hope and put in a lot of pressure on Pierre to be that new hope. I don't think it's going to check off all the boxes that need to be checked off. And I think there's going to be a lot more work to be done. But if this is a step in the right direction that makes people comfortable, taking another step towards the right, and then maybe eventually to the PPC itself, then this is part of the process. And this is what democracy looks like. It can take an election or two to really get a lot of support nationwide for a new party. But this is exactly the direction I like to see them go. So I'm glad they're moving towards Pierre at least. And let's keep going if Pierre is not the man.
So we got another question, depending how you look at it. It's easier or maybe a harder question to answer. Will the PPC focus on the largest voting bloc in Canada, non-voters?
100%. And I did a kitchen table meet and greet not too long ago. And at that table, there's about a dozen, 15 people or so. And one of them, other than me, was already a PPC supporter. The rest were CPC or never votes. There was some people that wanted to separate as a province from the country, and there was a good mix of people. But you're right, 30 to 40, and in some areas even larger, people don't vote. This is where the abuse comes in, because everybody was abused. You just have to look at your grocery bill, your fuel bills, and your income. They're not lining up on the same trajectory. You're not making more money over the years, but you're spending a lot more. And municipal corruption, I found, is a very, very big issue, because people are now tuning into that. That is waking a lot of people up to the idea that they need to get involved. The next step is to get them to the ballot box. We are seeing a tremendous amount of people that want to spoil their vote because of the traditional system of choice. Bringing PPC to the table, giving them a new choice, has renewed some of that optimism. There's two parts to that, though, payment. There's the ones who are paying attention, but they're spoiling their vote or choosing not to vote. And then there's the ones that are not paying attention at all. That group is something that we need to knock on the door for, and that's the group that we need to go and talk to. Town halls and other events, to go see them, because people are in pain. They definitely see the struggles that are out there themselves, but they may not be as aware of how important their involvement is. So we're going to get out there and make a commitment. And one of the commitments I make payment to people I meet is, if you can take a chance on me and give me your vote, I want to make a deal with you that you hold me accountable for it, because that's exactly what I want to bring forward my entire time in the House of Commons, is to bring accountability. So I want you to hold me accountable. So the deal is, if I'm not doing what you're looking for, or I'm not hearing your message, or I'm not hearing your voice, reach out to me. And I want to be a very attainable MP for everybody here in Parkland. So reach out to me. So the deal is, if I can earn your vote, you're going to hold me accountable to that. That is something that reminds the voter that they have the power and their vote matters. So they should put it where it's earned. And if they do that, they can actually see that their message, their voice is brought forward by representation. And if I fail to do that, then I haven't earned that vote and I don't deserve it the next time around. So I'll work twice as hard as any other party to make sure that I can do exactly that. I can earn your vote and then maintain it for the next election as well. I am pulling people out of their homes to come and vote. They are learning that they actually have that power and they should be executing it.
So I'm just going to recap what you said. Your two big issues are the economy and corruption. And the way that you're going to get through to people is through education, through things like town hall, which I think is fantastic. The poster asked the question to both of us. So I'll just say I agree with everything Jason just said. I'm doing basically the same thing. The other thing that I'm trying to also focus on is, the younger generations, and how do we get that? So we have to come up with interesting ways, like crypto is one. Food freedom is another one. Crypto is financial freedom. And then obviously you got the freedom groups who are like political freedom. So that's the other thing I'm focusing on.
Yeah, and I am seeing, maybe not with the millennials, but with the Gen Alphas, I think they're called. So the ones right after the millennials. Yeah, they are absolutely not following in millennials' footsteps when it comes to relying on the government. They're being rebels to the millennials, and they are getting more involved. I am seeing a lot more young people from that category joining us.
I think Attila the Hun got angry that we didn't address his question quick enough. So he resorted to all caps, but hopefully we answered your question.
Yeah,
Uh,
the answer is absolutely. We understand that it's a large voting bloc. It's because they've been abused and they don't think they have the power. So we're going to remind them by making those kind of commitments to them to bring their voice forward.
Another shout out to Brian. Pierre Polyev is ridiculous and a fraud.
I got not much to say about that. We're going to probably see him in power. We'll see what happens, but we do know the history of the CPC party. It's been a uniparty back and forth. It's just a little bit less left, but it still is left. So hopefully that's why PPC and other groups on the right are bringing people back and moving that Overton window back. Because remember, the Overton window is how society is responding. And right now it's very left. So left that people that used to be on the left are now centrist or even right. We need to move that thing back, because even liberals and NDPs and non-voters understand it's far too left to the left. It's very radical right now.
So Jason, I think you're such a superstar. We got way more viewers than I usually have. There's too many questions. So why don't I ask you the question that I originally was going to ask you while I curate this stuff? We were talking about law enforcement. I was on your show a while back and you pressed me on whether we should have sheriffs that are elected like the US, and I never really answered it. Yesterday, Sean Buckley was on my show. We were talking about like how the hell did Canada get to a point where cops are starting to cover their faces like terrorists, the balaclava?
Mm-hmm.
So what is the, if you had a magic wand, what would be the Jason Lavigne perfect solution for law enforcement?
Provincial constitution in Alberta would be a great start, because under provincial constitution, we can redo how we acquire top officials, including sheriffs. And that would be through elections with recall. And we want to make sure that there's mechanisms in place to provide incentives for the people making the big decisions for us, like law enforcement, to be doing what's in the best interest of the people. Because if they find themselves fighting against the people and the will of the people, there will be mechanisms like recall to remove them between elections. I do want to see us head towards a more Republican-style government. I know that we're stuck under a monarchy at this stage, and it could be a little while before that's changed. But we can still act more Republican-like, and that means more accountability on a constitution level. If we were able to build a constitution that had government accountability built into it and required things like term limits and recall, I think we can start acting in a more responsible way, which is exactly what you see in the United States. Every state has a state constitution, and it helps guide the government, including how it interacts with the people. And if we can inject more people to the process, I think what you're going to find is a nice shift towards aligning closer to the expectations of the people of the province. If Alberta can do that, I think other provinces can do that. And this requires no constitutional change. This is part of the Canadian framework of the Constitution. Provinces are permitted to go ahead and have their own constitution as long as it doesn't override the monarchy or the Canadian Constitution. And what I'm describing here is very much in line with the current Canadian framework and is possible. We just have to take that step, because I believe law enforcement should be a provincial matter, not a federal matter. We need to get the RCMP out, and we need to use the ability to have local policing and municipal policing and rural policing in tandem with offices like the sheriff's, and handle it that way. I do think they need to be elected along with provincial judges. I also think high-ranking officials like chief medical officer should be an elected position, and all of these positions should be able to have recall done to them and term limits put on them. And that's the only way I see us actually taking quick, within the current framework, changes that's going to restore the faith that we need in the justice system, the policing, and frankly, our government at this stage.
Great answer. Gary, what's your view on the UN? Gary says in British Columbia, the UN corruption reaches to the municipal level.
Well, when you add UN to every word, you give the opposite to it. So accountable, you add UN to it and you're unaccountable. Elected, you add UN to it, you're unelected. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're basically the preface to all the things that are good. I think possibly, and it's naive because I am a Gen X, I wasn't around during the Second World War, and I wasn't in any of the meetings on the creation of the UN. So I'm just going to say this with a grain of salt. It may have started with good intentions, but it hasn't ended with good intention. Consolidating power as much as they do, even with the WHO and other NGOs and organizations like that, is the wrong path. I don't mind consolidating guidance or consolidating information or consolidating committees. I don't mind that, but I don't like consolidating the power. The power needs to stay on a lower level to the people. So if the UN's missions was to just provide guidance like health and other things on a global level, I'd have less of an issue with it, because it would be up to us to adopt or understand or even modify those kind of guidances. But when it comes to power, this is where we're in a lot of trouble. So programs like UNDRIP, which is attempting to remove the sovereignty of the countries and nations and then apply it to other groups and use historical pains and sufferings that we've evolved from to do so. That's where we absolutely have a lot of trouble. And that's not the only program. UNDRIP is not the only program. There's several of them. So this is what I think we should be doing on a federal level and paying a lot of attention there. But we can't just drop the ball on a federal level, because this is happening provincial level and municipal level, where we're seeing this infiltration of WEF, WHO, UN, and other NGOs that may have some interest in mind, but it's not necessarily the best interest of Canadians.
I guess the question wasn't really asked to me, but my view, I take the Bruce Party view that I don't think all of this garbage is coming from the UN. I think it's homegrown from these academic institutions and these people with basket weaving degrees. They end up in government and they push this crap out. And they use the UN, sure, but they use everything else too, like the NGOs, with that pandemic preparedness treaty, that pandemic preparedness act that they just Bill C-293 they're trying to push through.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it didn't work at the UN level with the pandemic treaty, and now they're pushing it through locally. It's these people that have this like dystopian view, and they're everywhere. So that's how I see it.
Oh, they're proficient, and they're absolutely everywhere. More like a cancer is another way to look at it. And there isn't one way to remove it. There's going to be different types of things that you have to address. But I think the one thing that works in our favor is persistence. as long as we're as persistent or a little bit more than they are, this is how we win this. And I can report that it does look to me like they're scrambling, they're failing, and things are falling apart, because the populist movement globally, Payman, if you look outside of Canada, it's winning. It's really the only movement that is stopping globalists in their tracks. Netherlands and other countries have been very successful at basically stopping some of these globalist agendas out in the open through a populist movement. Canada may be a little bit late to the stage when it comes to realizing this, but we're on that track right now. We understand that the populist movement is the one that the globalists are afraid of, and it is working. They're not afraid of conservatives or labor or liberal or New Democrat. Like they're not concerned about those types of parties globally. They're concerned about the populist movement, the truckers, the farmers, the ones who are actually working, saying enough, and then forming a movement and fighting back. So this is why I have lots of optimism, because we're seeing it work all over the place here at Payman. And I do think that they're struggling. I do think they're struggling with their messaging. It didn't go over the way they thought it would. And they're struggling with the implementation, because people are waking up and they're seeing how to stop them now.
Good. Let them struggle.
Sure. Yeah. And I think one thing I kind of mentioned is a provincial constitution. Everybody's on board of that, except for corrupt politicians, because it exposes them, and globalists, because it takes the power away from the global efforts. It actually brings it down to a provincial level. So when you see the opponents to something like a provincial constitution, they're basically identifying themselves as globalist or corrupted, because those are really the two groups that would not want more transparency in government based in a foundational document like a constitution in a place like an Alberta province. They don't want that, because that's really the opposite direction that they're headed. So if we did that, I think we'd identify very quickly who's aligned with globalist versus the people. And that's kind of even why I want to see that process happen, so that we can take a stand and see exactly who's against providing the power to the people. Go ahead, say your name, stand up nice and proud, so we can go ahead and deal with that through elections and through possibly, employment, or through deportation or otherwise. It depends what their situation is. But I'm kind of excited about going through that process, because we need to do that.
So why don't we end with one last question? It's from Chris Andrews. Sorry, guys, but we got to end it. Payman. Oh, this is to me. The media likes to say that many 2021 liberals are switching to the conservatives, but is this really so? What if blocks of non-voters are just changing? I'll quickly share my thought, and then I'll hand it over to you, Jason.
Sure.
The level of hatred that liberals have for conservatives, I cannot underestimate that. I can't understress that. There's a saying in the U.S. that the Democrats would sooner vote for a monkey than a Republican. And when I talk to people that are disenfranchised liberals and NDP voters, they have contempt for the Conservative Party. They just feel like conservatives don't value life. So I think that Mr. Lavigne pointed this out earlier. We have an opportunity to pick up those voters. I don't think they're going over the conservatives. What do you say, sir?
They're searching, because they're very fed up. They're mostly parents and workers that are struggling, that are joining that particular wave out of the left. You are seeing that even in the US as well, not just in Canada. You're seeing this actually everywhere. There's a strong contingent of people who have basically said enough. And they're basically parents who are worried about not just their children, but children in general, or the next generation, and the workers who are finding it very difficult to make ends meet now. And this is where the NDP party was supposed to be there for them, but they realized, no, the NDP party is not for them anymore. So we're seeing them go. What you do see is some of them are going to the conservative, because they're kind of woken up now. They were lied to on the left for so long, saying things like, hey, if you're on the right, you're anti the people. But what we're seeing lately with the liberals supporting big business, big pharma, big everything, big media, big social, because they're not for the people anymore, and that includes the NDP. They're not for the people anymore. But when you listen to the messaging coming out of CPC and PPC, they are for the people way more than the left. They're just making rational decisions. I don't know if they're making emotional ones anymore, which is good news. When they remove the emotion from it and they just make more rational decisions, it's pretty clear we're gone radically left. So we need to shift it back to the right. So that's what I think you're seeing. You're seeing people who are rational and are waking up.
So Gilbert says the Democrats, they hated Trump, but they voted for him. Not true, Gilbert. 17 million Democrats chose not to vote in this election, but they voted in the previous election. So
That's interesting, isn't it? That's interesting. And did you see how quick the narrative they tried to switch it and said, "Hey, look, the elections work because your guy won. Let's not talk about the previous one anymore." No, I think what happened here is 15 to 17 million people didn't show up this time around. That's I think highlights more of a problem than maybe we even thought we had.
Yeah, my favorite was it Nancy Pelosi who said, like, technically, if Trump won the last election, he's not qualified to run for a third
Did she
term.
really try and do that? This will be his
Somebody
third
said
term
that. I
argument.
thought it was Nancy Pelosi, and I remember thinking, like, I wouldn't be surprised if the Democrats made that argument, and they did.
Oh
I mean,
wow. Well, that's a long shot, and wow, that happens.
yeah, that's just no shame, no shame. I'm
Yeah.
glad you enjoyed my joke, Gilbert. Jason, well, thank you very much for coming on the show. There was a lot of questions. You had a lot of audience. There was one or two tough questions, and I appreciate you, answering them like a champ.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate this opportunity. And just like you, it's rare for me, but it's happening more and more that people are asking me more questions, and I'm ready to get out there and answer them.
Yeah, yeah. It's they ask you a tough question, you mess up, but then next time you know how to deal with it. It's kind of like boxing, I guess.
Well, we're in training, aren't we? We're going to be representatives of the people. We better get used to it.
Right, you are. Jason, take it away. Give me your plug for your show. How do people follow you? How do they help support you?
The best way to find me is to go to the lavigneshhow.com. You'll find all the platforms I stream to, the podcast, and all the different material and content that I have. We're up to over 600 interviews now with various people from Canada and even around the world talking on important subjects that you don't find anywhere else. So if journalism and truth in journalism is something that you're attracted to, I do my best. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes, but I certainly do my best. You can find me at thelavigneshhow.com. Give me a follow. And to support me, you can go ahead and become a member. Not only do you get extended episodes and some Q&As, but you're joining a great community of like-minded people. We have some wonderful freedom fighters in there as well. Ken Drysdale's in there. Donald Best is in there. We've got some lawyers in there. So if you want to stay abreast with a lot of what's going on here in Canada, become a member. It gets you exclusive access to a great and growing community.
Who are you interviewing later today? What's your next episode?
Jeff Evely. So we're going to be talking about ideology, basically where it comes from, how is it propaganda, if it is, and what are the struggles and challenges that are coming up. And that will be in about an hour and a half. So you'll find me live on my platform shortly with Jeff Evely. And he's actually in Germany right now. He had to go there to get some surgery that he couldn't get here in Canada. So that might even come up. He had to travel to take care of himself as a vet.
All right. Well, best of luck on your show with Mr. Evely. Thank you very much for coming on. And a big thank you to the audience for participating.
My pleasure. And thanks a lot. And hello, audience. It was great to meet you all. I hope you follow me on parkland.vote as well. If you want to follow my efforts with the PPC, you can go there. And we do. Yes, Prairie. You'll find it on our lavigneshhow.com website. You'll find our YouTube channel too.
You got to reach out to Prairie, and you got to start hiring her. She's on the ball.
We got to start sending some marketing money because Prairie is amazing. Thank you, Prairie.
Bye, Jason. Take care.